Hello, my name is Ashley, this is Kiryu, and this is Faithful Rattos. Welcome or welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about euthanasia, deciding when it's the right time, what happens when you do euthanize a rat, and what happens after, the grieving process and the other options you have after. Deciding when to put a rat to sleep is a very, very difficult decision. It's a difficult decision every single time, no matter how many times you've done it before, but it is a really important decision and one that is important to get right. I don't think it usually feels right in the moment. It is an awful gut-wrenching decision to make, but it is one that is right for them and right in the long term. There are a few things that I think you should consider when deciding whether to euthanize a rat. One of them is, can they rat anymore? Can they do the things that they love to do? If you had a rat that absolutely loved digging and they have HLD, when they can no longer dig, are they happy? That's something to consider. I also like to consider avoiding the inevitable suffering when it comes to certain health issues, things like pituitary tumours and Zimbel gland tumours, and things like HLD as well, because we know these things can't be cured and it's inevitable that they will cause suffering at a future point. And I personally think that it's really beneficial to the rat to decide to euthanize before that suffering takes place, when you know that it's coming. Obviously, for some things you don't know and emergencies happen, but when you do know that an emergency situation is going to come in the future, making that decision beforehand can be really peaceful for you and for the rat involved. The obvious decision for euthanasia is when a rat is suffering. Now, there are so many different ways in which this could happen, whether that is a ruptured eye or heart failure or respiratory distress. There's many reasons why that you may consider when you have an emergency situation and a rat is actively suffering. One thing that might be helpful to you is the Grimace scale, which is a diagram that shows rat pain and uncomfortableness in their body language, and this is something to consider. The decision to euthanize a rat is a complex one, and one that I've actually made a full-length video on in the past, and I'll link that video if you're interested. I will just say that it is different every time. Each scenario is different, each rat is different, their limits are different depending on the situation, but I will always say that a week too soon is better than a day too late. I would rather let them go while they're still happy and still fine, rather than let it get to a point where we have an emergency situation, because that is very stressful for you, trying to find a vet that will see you, the cost of that, trying to find a vet that knows what they're doing when it comes to rats. And it's also stressful for them, of course, if they're in an emergency situation. So I always prefer to do it too soon rather than too late. But the right time is going to depend on the circumstance and the rat involved. The next part of this video is discussing the euthanasia methods that vets will use. This is not a video where I'm going to discuss home euthanasia, but I do think for certain types of people, especially if you do a lot of rescues or you're a breeder, this is an option that you should consider and look into and have someone go through with you who is experienced at doing humane euthanasias at home. However, at the vets, we have a few options, and most of this is centered around what the vet's preference is. But you are allowed to have a preference too, and it is a discussion that you can have with your vet. So the way that a rat is euthanized is after sedation, they are given an injection, and this injection eventually stops the heart and causes them to pass away. When it comes to animals like cats and dogs, this is usually given straight into the vein with an IV. Now, most rats, it's very difficult to get an IV into them, especially whilst they're awake, and it is quite a stressful experience. There are some vets who can do this, but it's not very common. So what we need to do is we need to make sure they are fully sedated to a surgical plane of sedation when it comes to euthanasia. And you have a couple of options for sedation when it comes to rats, and sometimes vets will have a preference, and sometimes you will have a preference, and both of those should be taken into account. So the first option you have is to use gas, whether that is sevoflurane or isoflurane. Sevo is a better option. It is more expensive for the vets, but it is a better option because it's not as smelly as isoflurane, and isoflurane can be quite stressful because of the odour and because they have to be in a small enclosed box to have that to gas them down. And you also have the option of doing a sedation injection, and this is something that I prefer. This is my usual go-to and my preference in vets go-to as well. This can sting a little, as most injections do. However, it is over much faster than the experience of being anaesthetized by the gas, because that is a long drawn out process. So it is something to consider. When it comes to gas, you usually can't be there for health and safety reasons. And this is usually because of licensing and insurance on the vet's part. It is not safe for them to allow you back there with the risk of this anaesthetic gas. However, some vets will let you back there. It's just not very common. So a lot of people who want to be there will prefer to do the sedation because they can fall asleep with you and you can hold them while they get the injection. I would say personally, I would go for the sedation injection over the gas. If the vet I'm going to is rat savvy, I will personally defer to their preferences, because I think vets do a much better job when they are confident and doing their preference of treatment. I think they're much more confident, and when they're confident, they're much more likely to get it right. So I prefer to defer to their preferences. However, if I do get a choice, I would personally choose sedation via injection. I think it's just less stressful all around in most cases. That's not to say that it's not stressful for them. Sometimes it is, but in most cases, it's the least stressful option. Now, the final injection needs to go either directly into the heart, directly into the bloodstream, directly into the liver, or it can be given into the abdominal cavity as well. It just will take longer to affect if it's not into one of those direct places. This is an extremely painful injection if they are awake, and that is why we have to have sedation beforehand. When it comes to other animals like cats and dogs, they do this via IV, and so it's a lot less stressful that way. It can take a while for it to work through the system, and the vet should be there with you whilst this is happening and monitoring the heart and pulse to ensure they know when they have passed on. Now, it doesn't take longer than usually 10 or so minutes, but it can take a little bit of time, and that's okay. At this point, I would also like to mention that sometimes there is involuntary movement in the body, and this is just muscles relaxing and contracting. This is a natural thing that happens when animals are passing away, and it's not them in pain or stressed or anything like that. It's just a natural response their body is making because of the drugs that are in their system and the fact they're passing away. And the last part of this video is talking about what to do afterwards. What are your options afterwards and what you should expect to happen. Now, I will say this: you need to grieve as you need to grieve, and this is different for everybody and different in every case, and you should not feel guilty if you feel differently for one rat in one situation than you do in another situation. I've had rats die of various things at various ages, and I'm always most at peace when they've passed away of an old age condition peacefully at a decent age. So one of the ones recently that I can think of is my rat Ezio. I made a video talking about caring for older rats, and we discussed his euthanasia in that video, and his euthanasia I found to be quite peaceful and relaxing because of the situation, because he was old, he was happy, he had HLD, and that was the reason he was being put to sleep, but it was a peaceful experience and it didn't involve any suffering for him. I have also had to put rats to sleep when they have been babies for very serious conditions that they were dying from. In those cases, I reacted differently again, and I've had everything in between. I've had an outbreak where I was putting a lot of rats to sleep in a very short amount of time. I've also had other things happen as well, and every time I've had to put a rat to sleep, it is different. I personally find that when you know your routine and the rituals you do surrounding their death, and you've learned how you cope best, it can be easier to know what to expect after you've been through it before. And if you, like me, have had a lot of rats put to sleep or pass away, this process gets easier to go through every time. The process itself isn't easy, but when you know what to expect, I think it's easier on the mind. You have options for what you want to do with their body afterwards. You can have them cremated individually or in a group. Individually means it's just them, and in a group means that other ashes will be there as well. You usually can't get ashes back if you go for a group cremation, but if you go for an individual cremation, you can get those ashes back. You can do this via your vet if you've had them put to sleep at the vet, or if they've passed away at home. You can also have this done privately by contacting the pet crematorium yourself. I've done this once before. It's not my personal cup of tea cremation, but I had a rat have a post-mortem, and in those cases they require you to have cremation. They don't allow you to have the body back after that. You can also bury them at home, whether that is in the ground or in a pot. I will say legally you have to own the land that you're burying animals on, and you're not legally allowed to bury them in public spaces. I have done this before, but now I know that is illegal and I won't be doing it again. But this is to do with the drugs in the system. I think that if they get into the soil, they can cause a little bit of a problem for the ecosystem. And if any animal was to scavenge them, then they would also feel the effects of those drugs. You also have other options like I have done, and this is having a taxidermy work with their body, whether that is to make a taxidermy mount or to clean the bones or anything in between. I personally find this sort of after death process helpful for my grieving process. I like to care for their bones and have them displayed. It's not for everyone, and that is okay, but it's something that I like to do. You can also just dispose of the body, whether they die at home, in the bin or in medical waste at the vets. That is also an option. And if you are someone who's lost a lot of rats, it can be an option. I know a lot of people don't really feel connected to the body after death, and that is perfectly fine. And I will really, really, really strongly say this. This is one of my most core held belief when it comes to rat keeping, and that is everybody grieves differently, and it is different for everyone. What feels right is different for everyone, and it can differ depending on the rat and the situation. And just because you don't grieve the same way as somebody else, that doesn't mean that it's wrong or bad. And I am really, really, really strongly a believer of that, and I do not like to see people judging others for the way that they grieve, whether they think they're grieving too much or not enough or in the wrong way. I think everybody's situation is personal and different, and in every situation you do what you need to do and you don't worry about what other people are doing, and vice versa. If you see somebody grieving, just let them to it. As long as they're not harming other people or living animals, let them to it. If you are unsure about what you want to do with the body after they have passed away, you can also defer this decision for a little bit in the future and just place their body wrapped up neatly in I use Ziploc bags and paper towels, or in a box or something like that. Put them in the freezer. I think most rat owners, or most experienced rat owners, have a number of rats in their freezer at any given time. And personally, I like to bury and decide what to do with my rats when they're in their family groups. And so they don't always die at the same time. So having them together waiting in the freezer for everybody is something that helps me. It might not be for you, but it is something that you have the option to do. And it does give you a little bit more time to decide what you want to do with their body without having to rush into it. Take your time, make the decision that is right for you. As I said, it's okay to feel differently than other people, and it's okay to feel differently than the last time you grieved a different rat in a different type of situation. That is totally okay. Some situations are just more traumatic than others. Emergency situations, rats dying young, your heart rat are all going to be much harder to deal with than a rat that wasn't super people focused, who died in a peaceful way in old age. I think these situations are different, and giving them the credit that they are different is okay. That doesn't mean that you loved them any less, it just means that it's different, and that's okay. One other thing that I will talk about is anticipatory grief, and this is grief you feel when you know you're going to be making that decision soon. And personally, this is where I grieve the most. After they're gone, I find that actually pretty easy to deal with. The anticipatory grief, when I know it's coming or I am struggling with their health, I find that to be the most difficult, and that's the period of time where I'm the most emotional and crazy. Would you agree? So for me, once they're gone, and I find that pretty easy to deal with. But for other people, that might not be true. That is something also to note. And yeah, those are the options. I think I've discussed everything. If there's anything you think that other people should know about the process, or if you want to share your experience, please do leave them down there in the comments. I have a video on my channel talking about when is the right time to euthanize and talking about some of my experiences. I have also mentioned a lot of my euthanasia decisions in vlogs that were happening at the time. If you're interested to know personal circumstances, it's just not something I have time to do in this video. And I have euthanized a lot of rats at this point. I've lost count, so I can't tell you about all of those situations, but you can find those on my channel. A lot of them are already in videos on my channel. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. It was a bit somber and a bit sad, but I do hope it was helpful. And if you have any questions, leave them down below. You can follow me on Instagram and on Facebook. I do have a website. I also have channel memberships if you want to join, and you can subscribe and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.